Howdy partners, it's so good to be here again. As you can see, the studio setup is slowly changing. I still have a bit of iterations to do, so it is work in progress, but I'm really enjoying the potential over here. In any case, I found myself going to the opening night of Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, and this might be the last in the franchise, though I'm sure if they really wanted to, which I'm sure they do, they'll find a way to make it work and have Ethan Hunt come back yet again. And before getting into specifics of this latest entry, let's just talk about the franchise for a moment, because in my eyes, this is really one of the most consistent and exciting and creative action spy thriller franchises of all time, really. I mean, don't get me wrong, these aren't masterpiece Citizen Kane level of films. Obviously, I'm exaggerating over here, but nonetheless, over 7 films, they're all a solid 8 out of 10 on average, which is no small feat, so I really just want to highlight just how consistent this franchise has been film after film. So of course I was going to check out this latest entry and see if it holds up, and this also marks the start of the summer blockbuster films, and this also happens to be one of those biggest and ambitious films of the year. So putting all the hype and excitement aside for a moment, I gotta say I was a little bit worried at the beginning of the film. It's a bit of a mixed bag, to put it lightly, and it did win me over in many regards by the end of it, but the first 30 minutes were rough around the edges. The entire first chapter of the film is front loaded to the breaking point with so much exposition from all the past films, and it's something that really bogs down the pacing of this film. Whereas in all the other Mission Impossibles, it was for the most part rock solid. We spend a ridiculous amount of time in these flash cuts revisiting key highlight moments from the previous films, as well as reintroducing familiar faces. And it feels like a particularly strange creative choice to take over here in terms of screenwriting, because I think most of the audience going into these films are already longtime fans, and we don't need the update. We pretty much know all these characters and what's going on over here. So we can just get to the chase and get to the meat of this individual story here. Additionally, I will say there are a few moments in the film where it feels like it was repeating itself at a few occasions. I obviously won't go to specifics to avoid spoilers, but I do find that there's quite a lot of fat that could have been trimmed from this film. And another thing relatively early in the film that totally shocked me, and I did not expect that from this kind of film, was that there was this potentially exciting fight sequence that was happening totally off screen. Now, I get that this was used for comedic effect to then show the reaction of the character that was watching the carnage happening, but I thought this was a giant missed opportunity to have this really gritty combat sequence, especially when you compare it to that bathroom fight sequence in Mission Impossible Fallout. Holy shit, was that an incredible fight sequence, and then comparing that to this moment in the film, yikes. And as for the comedic timing of that moment itself, did it work for me? Not at all, actually. I thought it was super cringe. There are quite a few moments in the film that I thought were really campy and silly. I wonder if other people feel the same way about the comedy in this film. It just didn't work for me, what can I tell you? So as you can see, the start of the film for me was really rough around the edges, and I was genuinely worried that, oh my god, is this the first Mission Impossible film that's going to actually drop the ball on us? And as if all that weren't bad enough, there is an event that happened that has nothing to do with the film itself, but I just have to talk to you about it because I've never had this happen to me in all the years that I've been going to the cinema. So as I mentioned, I went to see this on opening night. I went with my colleague to the IMAX screening, and usually these are pristine and beautiful experiences, but this time the IMAX screening was defective. So after 15 minutes of watching the film, we realized that the screen would literally freeze for a second or two before resuming again. And at first we were hoping like, okay, this is just one moment that it bugged out, but no, it started getting more frequent and worse. Literally just started stopping for several seconds before being clean for another minute or two before beginning again. It was a total buzzkill, took us out of the experience. Luckily, someone or a few people in the crowd went to see the manager, so they paused the film, said, sorry, we're gonna fix the issue, rewind it back 5 minutes, and then resume our screening experiences. Sorry for the inconvenience. If only that were the end of the adventures. So once they actually fixed the screening, they resumed the film, not 5 minutes before where we were, but like 30 minutes later, spoiling an important moment, and then once again like an hour later to the climactic airplane sequence that we've all seen in the trailers. We were all screaming and just losing. We're like, no, what are you doing? Holy shit, I could not believe this was happening. Literally the first time I've ever seen that happen. And then they finally brought us back on track where we were before. Not quite 5 minutes before, but good enough. And then the rest of the film was a smooth ride. Not just in terms of the IMAX screening, though that too, luckily, thank God. But literally as of that moment, the mission was divulged, and we realized just how impossible of a mission it was. Which, of course, this is why we come to these films, and it was an extremely exciting and nail-biting ride from that moment on until the end. It's a real shame that the film started off on a bad foot, because the rest of the film is honestly spectacular. For the most part, there are a few hitches over here, but let me tell you, there's this underwater sequence in particular that I thought was phenomenal. My highlight of the film. It was beautifully shot with this dynamic environment, and it was such a tense and stressful moment, literally holding the edge of my seat watching that. God, was that exciting. I cannot sing high enough praise to that portion of the film. Literally the whole second act of the film, I thought, chef's kiss. Like that's the kind of film we were looking for over here. And of course, we've all seen it in the trailers and even the film poster with Tom Cruise just hanging off the edge of a plane. That sequence was exhilarating and just gravity defying. Honestly, it blows my mind that Tom Cruise just goes above and beyond the call to duty to do all these stunts himself without a stunt double. It truly is some industry defining stunt work over here. Stuff that nobody else would dare tackle, so I really do have to take off my hat to him. And these are just action sequences that we never get to see on the big screen. I mean, this is the kind of stuff big Hollywood productions should be doing, and why it's worth seeing on the biggest screen possible, the best sound. Truly exhilarating stuff. Once again, just so tension filled, me just grabbing the edge of my seat to the point where I just have white knuckles and just holding onto my breath just to see how this is going to turn out. Though I will say, if I had to be a little bit critical for that airplane sequence, it does drag on a little bit. As exciting as it is, I do feel it starts to spin its wheel a little bit too much. As incredible and creative and audacious of a stunt work as it is, don't get me wrong, but I do think it could have been a bit more concise. So apart from those key set piece moments, which we come to expect in the Mission Impossible films, another key element of this franchise is the team itself. Of course, there are some familiar faces which have returned and they're just as brilliant as ever, but there are a bunch of new additions as well as some new team members that you might not have expected. And I always love that skeleton crew vibe in the Mission Impossible films. There is this nice little family that's formed of these unlikely heroes, and I really do like how they all play off of each other. And though I was complaining about the film kind of front-loading itself with so much exposition, there is one legacy character tie-in that obviously I won't spoil, that comes back into this film specifically that I thought was really cute and endearing and something that none of us I think expected. And I think it's actually a really great character that got added over here. A nice and welcome surprise. Though there is another legacy character which I will go into detail, I felt they didn't get a proper and nuanced treatment in this film. It felt very rushed and kind of brushed aside, but of course I don't want to get into specifics. And while we're still talking about characters and me being a little critical, the villain Gabriel that got introduced in the previous film, I felt way less compelling this time around. He didn't have nearly as much screen time and direct dramatic impact into the film. He was more of this kind of background entity, as well as the entity itself. I think that's what it's called. Of course it is. They repeated that name like 5,000 times in the film, which got a little annoying. But even outside the immediate team or the villains of this film, I think there's a really strong cast. Angela Bassett, who plays the President of the United States, is fantastic, and she has quite a decorated list of A-list actors as her chief of staff, who, even though they have relatively limited screen time, are pretty compelling to all see on screen at the same time. And then there's also this other crew that we meet at one point in the film in the submarine that I thought were really exciting. The captain of that submarine might have been the highlight of the side characters in this film. And I was also super surprised to see Katie O'Brien over there. She didn't do all that much, but it was nice to see her, especially after seeing that low-budget indie film that I absolutely loved last year, Love Lies Bleeding. But to wrap up my thoughts about this film, I thought this was a super exciting and creative action spy thriller. Once it got going into its own lane, because honestly, like I said, the first 30 minutes, it is unfortunate that it started off on the wrong foot. It really got me worried for a moment, but then the rest of the film, I found the film absolutely riveting and exciting. The kind of stuff you want to see on the big screen. I will say it's probably one of the weaker Mission Impossible films overall, pound for pound, but I still really enjoyed watching it and I do recommend it. And I also do appreciate how its thematics of AI and nuclear warfare kind of parallel with what is going on in the world today, even if it doesn't explore it in all that much depth, and it is totally ridiculous at times. I know this is a Mission Impossible film and it is kind of over the top and crazy, but goddamn does Tom Cruise have the grip strength of a god to just hang from a plane at that height, at that speed for that long. Jesus Christ. Exciting stuff for cinema, but in terms of reality, more than a few question marks. But still, I really enjoy my time, so I say this is a solid 7 out of 10. Once again, not the best Mission Impossible film in the franchise, but it did really redeem itself in the second act going up until the end. Goddamn was that exciting. So with all that being said, wishing you and your loved ones nothing but the best. Take care and talk to you soon. Bye now.